There's a moment in almost every interaction where something invisible happens, but it changes everything. It's not when she smiles at you, it's not when she laughs at your jokes, and it's definitely not when she agrees to go out with you. It's something far more subtle. It's the exact moment her mind quietly updates your value file. And once that update happens, she doesn't see you the same way again. Not necessarily in a bad way, not always in a good way either, just differently, permanently. The strange part is, most men have no idea when it happens or what triggered it. They just feel the shift, the slower replies, the reduced excitement, the emotional distance they can't explain. So here's the real question. In the next few minutes, we're going to break down the exact psychological moment when a woman mentally recalibrates your value in her mind. Not in a superficial dating advice way, but through real psychological principles like impression formation, emotional anchoring, novelty decay, and perceived relational value. Because attraction isn't static, it's constantly updating based on behavior patterns, emotional signals, and consistency of identity. And once you understand this, you stop guessing why interest fades and start seeing the exact mechanisms behind it. More importantly, you learn how to stay on the right side of that mental value shift without pretending to be someone you're not. Let's go deep. When she first meets you, her brain doesn't see you. It sees a pattern, a rough psychological sketch built in seconds. Maybe you're confident and grounded. Maybe you're uncertain but trying hard. Maybe you're overly eager and emotionally available too fast. She's not analyzing consciously. This is automatic impression formation. Your brain does it with everyone. And here's where it gets interesting. That first snapshot becomes the reference point she subconsciously uses to measure everything you do afterward. If you start strong, calm, self-contained, slightly unpredictable in a healthy way, your later actions reinforce attraction. But if you start too accessible, too emotionally exposed, too fast, her brain logs you as already figured out. And once someone is mentally categorized as predictable, dopamine response drops. Curiosity fades, so the advice isn't act hard to get, it's simpler. Be consistent with self-possession. Don't overexpand yourself too early. Let value unfold instead of spilling it. Because the first impression isn't just important, it becomes the psychological baseline she never fully forgets. And once that baseline is set, everything else either strengthens it or weakens it. Now here's where the shift actually begins. There's a silent killer of attraction, emotional predictability. Think about a real scenario. A man starts texting her frequently. At first, she's engaged, curious, responsive, but within days, she can predict exactly when he'll text, what he'll say, how he'll react. There's no tension, no unknown variable, and psychologically, curiosity dies when prediction becomes effortless. This connects to what behavioral psychology calls reward uncertainty. The brain is more engaged when outcomes are slightly unpredictable, not chaotic, but not fully mapped either. When everything becomes too smooth, too available, too emotionally readable, the mind stops investing attention. And here's the subtle part. She doesn't consciously think he is boring now. She simply feels less pulled toward engaging. Replies get shorter. Energy drops, interest softens. This is the exact moment her internal valuation system updates, not because you became worse, but because nothing new is being added. So the shift is not emotional rejection, it's cognitive saturation. To prevent this, you don't need games. You need depth variance, sometimes open, sometimes focused, sometimes unavailable because you're actually living your life. Because mystery is not deception, mystery is dimensionality, and without it, even strong attraction flattens over time. Now let's go deeper into the most misunderstood trigger. Here's a harsh psychological truth most men don't hear clearly enough. Availability lowers perceived value when it is not balanced by emotional grounding. Let's break it down. Imagine two men. Both are kind, both are interested, but one is always immediately available, always responding, always adjusting his schedule, always there. The other is warm, but selective with his time. He responds, but not reactively. He engages, but from a centered life, not emotional urgency. Over time, her brain assigns them different internal labels. One becomes safe but low priority. The other becomes valuable but not fully accessible. This is not manipulation. This is how human valuation psychology works across friendships, dating, even business. Value is often linked to scarcity signals, not artificial scarcity, but real evidence that your time and attention are not unlimited. When a woman senses that your entire emotional world revolves around her response, something shifts internally. Not dislike, not anger, just devaluation of intensity. Because intensity without grounding feels unstable, and instability is not attractive long term, so the recalibration happens quietly. You like me more than I like you. And that sentence alone changes how she experiences every interaction afterward. The key is not to become distant, it's to become anchored elsewhere first, your goals, your routines, your identity, because attraction respects centered energy more than constant presence. Now pay attention because this next part is where most men completely misread the situation. Here's something counterintuitive. Sometimes she doesn't lose attraction because you did something wrong. She loses it because nothing changed. Let that sit for a second. The human brain is wired to detect movement, contrast, and evolution. If your emotional state, behavior, and presence stay identical week after week, her perception starts to compress. So the real question is not, what did I do wrong? It's, what is there to discover about me that she hasn't already mapped? Because once the mind believes it has fully mapped someone, interest doesn't crash, it slowly evaporates. Now let's continue. One of the most overlooked psychological dynamics in attraction is emotional contagion. People don't just respond to what you say, they respond to what they feel around you. Imagine a man who subtly communicates anxiety through constant checking, over-explaining, or needing reassurance. Even if he says all the right words, the emotional signal is neediness. Now imagine another man who is calm, internally steady, not easily shaken by small uncertainties. The woman doesn't consciously analyze this difference, she feels it, and over time she mirrors it back. If your presence feels emotionally heavy or uncertain, she unconsciously begins to detach to stabilize her own emotional state. If your presence feels grounded, she relaxes into it. This is where many value rewrites happen, not because of one mistake, but because of accumulated emotional signals that no longer feel attractive to mirror. And here's the practical shift. You don't fix this by saying more. You fix it by regulating your internal state before you interact. Because attraction is often not built in conversation, it's built in emotional tone. Now let's move into the final mechanism. The one that seals the shift completely. At some point, her mind stops seeing your behavior and starts seeing your identity. This is called identity lock-in in psychological terms. It's when repeated patterns form a stable label in someone's mind. You're the consistent one. You're the uncertain one. You're the exciting one. You're the predictable one. And once that label forms, she filters your behavior through it. Even if you change slightly, she interprets it within the old frame. So if you were overly available early but later become slightly distant, it doesn't read as growth, it reads as inconsistency. If you were grounded early but later become needy, it feels like a downgrade from her internal model. This is why early emotional signaling matters more than most men realize. Because after identity lock-in, you are no longer evaluated moment to moment. You are evaluated through a mental template. The only way to influence it is through sustained behavioral consistency over time, not sudden changes. And this is also why some men struggle to recover attraction once it drops. They're trying to rewrite a file that has already been saved. Which brings us to the deeper truth. What really changes her perception of your value is not a single moment. It's the accumulation of signals that tell her one thing: who you are when nothing is happening, not when you're trying to impress, not when you're trying to keep her attention, but when you are simply existing in your own life. Because at the deepest psychological level, attraction is not about perfection. It's about perceived self-containment. A man who feels like he needs nothing from the interaction projects a completely different emotional gravity than a man who is emotionally dependent on it. And when a woman mentally rewrites your value, what she is really doing is updating her belief about your internal foundation. Are you stable? Are you grounded? Are you expandable or centered? Once that answer shifts in her mind, her emotional experience of you shifts with it. Not because she chose it consciously, but because the nervous system always responds to perceived stability first and personality second. If this resonated with you, it probably means you've experienced that shift before and couldn't quite explain it. And now you can see it's not random. It's psychological. The real question is this: have you ever noticed the exact moment someone's behavior toward you changed, and what do you think triggered it? Think about it. Because once you start recognizing these patterns, you stop reacting emotionally to them and start understanding them structurally. Next time, we'll break down how women test emotional stability without ever saying a word, and how most men unknowingly fail those tests without realizing they were happening. And remember this: attraction doesn't disappear suddenly. It updates quietly until one day you notice the version of you she's responding to is no longer the same one you think you're showing.